Okay, good morning or good afternoon, as the case may be. Welcome to this keynote session. My name is Marty Miller. I'm the Executive Director of the Office of Rural and Farmworker Housing, which is a nonprofit based in Yakima, Washington. We provide affordable housing development services to partners throughout rural Washington state, largely nonprofits and public housing authorities, sometimes employers, to build a wide variety of affordable housing, primarily farm worker housing in our history, but we've also done a lot of work on housing for families experiencing homelessness and veterans and seniors and just the general population. We have a wonderful opportunity today, which I'm very excited about, and that is to welcome Justin Maxson. Justin is the Deputy Undersecretary for Rural Development, and he brings with him some great experience in economic development and the foundation world, and now in the world of the federal government. As Justin and I have discussed this and prepped for this opportunity, we really wanted to have it be conversational, kind of a fireside chat, if you will. And so please feel free to enter questions into the chat feature and we'll take them as we go along. But I've also been able to prepare with some questions that I'm looking forward to asking Justin. And so without any further ado, Justin, welcome. And if you would tell us a little about who you are and what rural development is. And I think that'd be a great way for us to get started.
Thanks. I got to say, it's just a pleasure to be here. So appreciative of the invitation, and I look forward to the conversation and answering as many of the comments and the questions as I can. I definitely bring to this an appreciation for rural housing. I recognize it's such a critical foundation to support healthy rural economies and communities. Health outcomes, economic outcomes, education outcomes are all better for families and children and safe and affordable housing. Housing is the largest RD program in terms of our dollars and our staff. And it's just a critical piece of what rural communities have to have. I think part of what I hope to share today is just a sense of our priorities as it relates to housing, trying to keep people in their homes through the pandemic, multifamily preservation. There's a cliff out there we're aware of that's going to require serious resources, and our efforts to find those resources are at the top of the list, and the need to reinvest in our staff and in the IT that helps us support our partners in the field that are so important to the implementation of our programs. I suspect a lot of them are on this call in Washington. Thank you all for what you do. And so I feel totally privileged to be here and in this seat. It's an incredible time of opportunity, I think, in the federal government. I think both that Secretary Vilsack and the president are truly interested in a rural renewal and are trying to figure out what are the policy opportunities. I think for the first time in my lifetime, there's a conversation about the scale of potential resources that actually match the scale of the challenges and the problems. Of course, there's a lot between here and there, as I'm sure everybody who follows the news is able to tell. This last week or so has been particularly heated as this conversation progresses. Just a second about rural development. For those of you who don't know, our housing work is part of a broader set of strategies that USDA Rural Development has to support rural economic prosperity for all. So we do all this housing work, we support water and sewer infrastructure and community facilities. We make broadband grants and loans and guarantees. We support clean energy production and utilities. We do a lot of work with rural small businesses and cooperatives. It's an incredible range of tools, and it's part of what makes rural development, I think, important and unique. And I'm most excited when we can bring many of those the tools to the same communities. One of the other things about RD that not everybody knows is we've got about 450 offices across the country. And I think those offices are part of the secret sauce that give RD so much, I think, potential, because we've got boots on the ground, often staffed with people who are from those communities, who understand the issues and the context, and are able to, I think, when they're resourced and supported, make difficult things happen in communities that haven't had access to the sort of resources that they deserve. I bring, gosh, 25 years. I know I could barely look that old, but I bring 25 years of community economic development experience. I'm not a housing expert, so I want to get that out up front, but have spent, gosh, probably 15 of those 25 years in and around housing issues, and I sure recognize its importance. Just a minute about RHS, and then I'll hush. You know, the Rural Housing Service is one of the three agencies within RD. We provide loans, grants, and guarantees for both single and multifamily housing. We provide technical assistance support and grants, often in partnership with nonprofits and tribes and local governments. We've got approximately 1.2 million homeowners that we've helped support, and about 400,000 tenants, which just gives you a sense of our scale across the portfolio across rural America. You know, within Washington, I won't share all of the highlights, but we have done a lot of work, I think, over the years. In the last 5 years, it's been about 700 homes financed, 6,000 homes, and $1.6 billion through guaranteed loans. We've got 283 multifamily properties. So it's a real commitment in Washington State, and a bunch of the organizations on this call are obviously critical to helping ensure those resources get to the communities that need them. So I'll stop there.
Okay, well, that's a very helpful overview. Thank you very much.
Sure thing.
As you think about the Biden-Harris administration's priorities and Secretary Vilsack's priorities, can you talk a little more about, maybe dive into a little more depth, if you would, on how you see those translating to rural development and the rural housing services?
Sure. So there are really four main ones: combating the pandemic, trying to support economic recovery, climate change, and promoting equity, particularly but not exclusively racial equity. And I think I'll start there. You know, I don't think a week has gone by in my 8 months where I have not been part of some senior high-level conversation about both racial equity and spatial equity, really trying to figure out how do we drive our programs to communities, particularly people of color and rural communities that have not had access to them historically. And there's a lot of work going on across USDA. The secretaries in particular is trying to drive at the missionary level really tangible changes in our programs that should show up by who's able to access them. In RD, And in our housing work in particular, we're trying to develop new policies to enhance affordability in rental properties and increase home ownership opportunities. We're part of an interagency working group established by the president called PAVE. It's Property Appraisal, Valuation, and Equity, which seeks to look at the undervaluing of homes owned by people of color, particularly during the appraisal process. We're very interested in expanding our Section 504, our home repair program, which is the program that has the highest utilization by people of color. So equity is a conversation both across the department. We just stood up, we've advertised to fill slots on an equity commission that will bring folks outside the department to this commission to help guide both the programmatic shifts that have to happen across the department, but also I think the cultural change. There's a lot of work that needs to happen, and we're designing and actually initiating a bunch of training that's about helping folks understand what equity is and how to pursue it. So that's equity. On the COVID side, obviously we spent a lot of time thinking about evictions and foreclosures. About a third of our renters, approximately 133,000 people, are people of color. This summer, we got access to $100 million from the ARP and rental assistance to provide support to about 30,000 rent overburdened renters, many of them people of color. Another aspect of RHS is the community facilities program. We stood up something called the Emergency Rural Healthcare Grant Program. It's about $500 million under the RHS community facilities, that effort to help broaden access to both COVID testing and vaccines, and to support a broader range of rural healthcare services. So that's COVID. I will say, I think everything we do, particularly in rural development, aims to be about economic recovery. And we've been particularly thoughtful about how do we help through restructuring loans and shifting the terms and rates to reduce the economic challenges that some of our borrowers face. On the climate front, we're doing everything we can to ensure that our single family and multifamily properties are compliant with the International Energy Conservation Code, the IECC. That includes working with the White House Council on Environmental Quality on new ideas to help make homes and properties increasingly energy efficient. And the 504 program allows homeowners to use the funds for repairs and energy efficiency improvements. And we'll talk about reconciliation, I hope, but there's about $100 million proposed in that for Section 504, which will underline and promote energy efficient improvements for homeowners. So those four priorities: equity, climate, economic recovery, and COVID recovery, remain sort of the threads that cut across almost everything that we do.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that outline. We had a question come in that I think dives a little deeper into some of this. David asks if you can tell us more about the U.S. Department of Agriculture's water and sewer infrastructure programs. That is often a significant challenge in rural areas in particular, that for both housing and economic development, and actually touches a number of the four priorities that you just outlined.
Yeah, it's a great question. It is, in some ways, I think that sort of infrastructure is such a critical foundation to what healthy communities need access to. Clean, affordable, and safe water enables so much else to happen. RD does have a large suite of programs. I'll get the number wrong, so I won't quote it, but it's upwards of 15 grant and loan and guarantee and technical assistance programs. We've got some key partners, RCAP, the National Rural Water Association, all of whom help us land that financing in communities that are unable to support upgrades or new systems. We have a great website. So if you put USDA rural development in any browser, there's a section that'll enumerate all of our water and sewer programs a lot more specifically than I can. I will say what we specialize in is rural communities and the hardest pressed rural communities. Obviously EPA does a lot of water and sewer work. They're really good state revolving loan funds that we partner with all the time to get water and sewer deals done. We're, as part of reconciliation, again, we've advocated for, we hope to see additional resources that are made available for water and sewer, particularly on the grant side, that allow us to work with tribes and communities that are experiencing significant economic distress.
Yeah, good. I can share too, Justin, that Washington State does a lot of the collaboration that, just like you were discussing, with the rural development staff you mentioned earlier, our state ecology department, commerce, there's CDBG stuff, so there's lots of good collaboration going on.
I will say, I think we are most effective when we're in a partnership with local organizations and governments, right? Even at the scale that we're able to operate, the need and the scope of demand are so large, we are unable to do any of this alone, and we don't really try to. One other priority I didn't mention that RD has is really trying to build the capacity of our local partners by making grant resources and other funds available to them, so they're more able to effectively partner with us and draw down, the sort of resources that we're able to provide. I will say, I was a RD applicant a lot longer than I have been a political appointee, and our applications are not easy. They're complicated. Some of them take a great deal of paperwork, not just for the end user or the homeowner, but also for the applicant organization. So we're really trying to think about both how do we build the capacity of our partners, but also how do we simplify and streamline our processes so it's easier for our partners to access the resources that we have.
Yeah, great. Well, as a organization that uses a lot of those programs, I know I can speak to, they are very valuable, and they can be complex and challenging. So I appreciate your honesty in that.
Yeah, of course. We one of the other things that I've begun to learn is just how often the side rails that we operate within are congressional. And they set the guide rails, and then we have a very experienced and high quality set of career staff that work hard to create the rules and the regs based on that authorizing language. And there is a fair bit of flexibility in some places, and in other places there's very little flexibility. And part of what I'm able to do in this position is try to spotlight where there exactly where there are those opportunities and try to advance conversations on the Hill about what adjustments would make us better able to support communities and organizations that help us deliver the important resources that you have to have access to get these things accomplished in rural communities.
Yeah, well, that's great. And I know there are many organizations and entities in Washington State that would be happy to join those efforts, if there are roles we can play to help deliver that message.
Just a brief example, in reconciliation, there's a $3.5 billion proposal called the Rural Partnership Program. And it's aims to be a unique form of grant resource that's multi-year and flexible operating support to help networks of groups that are trying to get things done in a place. But it's got a low match, it's got high flexibility, it's meant to be multi-year to provide some of that fundamental operating support to get hard things done. Again, I don't want to hang everything on reconciliation, but some of the ideas that are in it just create a different table on which all of us can do our work. And I'm hopeful that we may not see exactly what's proposed, but that we'll see something get across the finish line.
Yeah, sounds very interesting. Yeah. Since we're on the topic of budget reconciliation,
sure.
Could you tell us more? We've had a number of speakers discuss the potential impacts on various HUD programs and the tax credit program and other elements of the federal budget. As you think about budget reconciliation, what do you think that could mean for the rural housing service and rural development more broadly?
Gosh, a lot. And this is where it's like it's like a little bit, you're at a buffet and you smell all the things and you start to salivate and you can't wait to dig in. And there's a little bit of that. And I hope it's not a big psych and we don't get access to any of it. But there's about $5 billion proposed for RHS, which includes really important investments like multifamily housing preservation is probably the largest. I think it's over $4 billion. That includes new construction in addition to preservation, an increase in rental assistance, an increase in 502 homeownership direct and guaranteed loans, increase, as I said, in the 504 programs, and 523, the mutual self-help grants. So there are a lot more resources. I think, as I said earlier, the RHS staff is also our largest staff. And the single family housing direct program is one of our most staff intensive. And there's a big chunk of resources, I want to say $250 million to significantly invest in higher staffing levels and in the sort of IT modernization necessary to bring some of our housing programs into, gosh, what feels like the 20th century, much less the 21st century. So I think that's sort of a high level. And, again, we're not gonna hang the future of our work on the complicated and political gymnastics that reconciliation will take. Obviously, that would accelerate a lot. But in the rental assistance and some other key provisions that are likely to pass and help our housing programs. As we think about the Farm Bill, that's another opportunity between now and 2023. We'll do a lot of thinking about how to make the case. But part of what we think we have to do is communicate to the outside world, particularly the Hill, but not exclusively, why we need to invest in a modern RD. And for too long, RD has been underinvested in, and that includes some of our historical authorizing language that is 50 years old, and we need to update some of that language. Part of it is more investment in a capacity building that I just think the data and evidence about strong local partners is so compelling, but we don't have the resources we need to help build the strong local partners. Though we have a lot of them, but they have to, it's a little bit of baling twine and, paper clips in some cases. And we have some really high capacity, really effective partners that are able to get incredible work done, who with additional resources could get even more done.
Mm-hmm.
So that sort of argument to why supporting RD, it's not really about us, but if we want to make good on the commitment to rural America that the president and the secretary have, it's going to take modernizing RD, particularly our housing, but not exclusively in those programs. And I think reconciliation and the Farm Bill are important down payments on that.
Yeah, great, very good. You mentioned preservation. The state of Washington has seen that as a priority also. In the last couple of years, our legislature and governor have invested several $1 million to help leverage the acquisition and preservation of rural housing, rural affordable housing, especially within the RD portfolio. Could you talk to us a little bit more about potentially, we know there's a big backlog of projects to be funded with the NPR program. You mentioned that briefly as a part of budget reconciliation.
Yeah.
But there's also some potential process improvement matters to consider there. Could you talk to us more about your thinking and the agency's thinking about preservation?
Sure. I mean, as I said, it's definitely a priority, and the resources in reconciliation would just allow us to blow it out of the water in a way that would make a big difference. Obviously, as you said, appropriated funding has just historically been inadequate. I think we've only preserved 31,000 units since 2005 or 6, and more than almost 50,000 units have been lost. If the 4.3 billion in reconciliation came through, we'd be in a different place. And I feel like with the right planning, we can figure out through the multifamily housing organization within RHS how to build the right collaboration between our stakeholders, such that we can target the properties that are in the most need of funding, particularly in partnerships with states that see this as a real need. The bill also provides authority for us to build new a 515 property for the first time in a decade, which I think would help in addressing the units that have been lost. As you know, we went through a reorg in multifamily in 2019 and 2020. And part of that was about trying to standardize the processes and operating procedures across the programs, aimed at better customer service, better use of IT, more consistent underwriting, and better portfolio oversight. And I think from my seat, there have been some real successes there. I also think we acknowledge the things that could have gone better about it. I think we could have probably communicated better with stakeholders and set up some more iterative ways to get feedback. There were big administrative shifts that that I think slowed down some of our interactions, and it was a big cultural shift from, I think, more a relationship model of that work at the state level to a more risk-based approach at the national level. And we're still, like, that team acknowledges the scale of the adjustment and wants to hear from our stakeholders and do everything we can to make preservation a priority and make sure our systems are streamlined and supportive of as much of that as we can, even including the limited resources we have until we have a lot more, which could happen.
Yeah. You touched on a couple of really important things, which I appreciate, the preservation efforts and the multifamily housing reorganization. Well, I can certainly see the rationale for the reorganization as it's been implemented in Washington State. It's been confusing at times, frankly. You know, the previous structure, while it had its shortcomings, you know, with interpretation varying from state to state and so forth, one thing it had going for us was there was a clearer path of communications with area office and state office and so forth. Do you have thoughts or recommendations as stakeholders and participants are now involved in it? You know, what's the recommended avenue of communication to try to engage with the right people who, you know, are now in this new reorganized multifamily structure?
It's a really good question, and I should have an easy answer, and I don't. I mean, it's out there, the easy answer, and I can promise you the staff who run that program are interested in the feedback. Let me figure out what the best vehicle is to do that, whether it's an email or I know they do listening opportunities, and if there's a particular one we can do in Washington, I suspect we'd be glad to do that. So let me get back with you, Marty, and perhaps you can help me figure out how to communicate to this audience so I can share the best way to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'd be more than happy to help with that.
I could make something up, but I'm probably going to be wrong. So I'll just get back with you about it.
Well, and I can tell you too that we've been in conversation with the staff at RHS about this question as well, and they're actively working on it too. It is a big change, you know, and we, like I said, we can see the rationale for it, but now it's just, you know, trying to get it to work better for everybody involved in a national, fairly complex system.
Yeah, it's a big shift, and I think everybody understands that. And the hope is that it's easier over time as we get used to operating in the new mode. We get better at communication. We make tweaks where we've identified adjustments that don't quite operate in the way that we hope they would. I mean, I can say that I know our staff is interested in hearing what folks have to say. And since I've been here 8 months, I know there are already adjustments in process toward improvements where we see a challenge.
Yeah, great. So thinking even beyond budget reconciliation, Justin, if there is a beyond budget reconciliation, I know that's a major priority, but what other priorities do you have for rural housing services or RD more generally as you think of the potential and possibilities of this agency?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I talked about some of them. This greater focus on a capacity building, just a recognition that we need to do more to, I think, to strengthen local partners. I mean, I will say, and I think I said this at the beginning, we want to keep folks in their homes. So the eviction and foreclosure moratoriums, even with their difficult, transitions this summer with the Supreme Court striking down the eviction moratorium, we're doing everything we can to figure out how to work with distressed homeowners and landlords and tenants. So like that will, particularly around evictions, will continue to be a priority of ours. We're trying to get the word out about the Treasury programs and how to access those as smoothly as possible. We're tracking any pending evictions in any 515 property, so we can engage with landlords before evictions happen. On the moratorium side, we're doing a lot in terms of payment deferrals, term extensions, mortgage recovery advances, rate reductions. We're also, the White House has a working group set up on foreclosure related policies, which require lenders to re-examine loans before advancing a foreclosure. So that's one big area of just how do we keep people in their homes. We're not out of the woods yet. And we have some concern that if we take our eye off this ball, it'll be problematic, particularly for economically distressed communities and people of color. We've talked a fair bit about multifamily housing preservation, so I won't say more there except to say it's just a critical reality that we have to figure out how to do it. Okay. And if it's not a reconciliation, it has to be something else. So we're continuing to make the case and we'll continue that drumbeat. This is another place that I think our efforts to communicate with stakeholders is key. HAC and other national players who care about rural housing have been just essential partners of ours to make the case federally and again to the Hill. So I would just say any work you all can do that continues to make the case in concrete ways that our legislators can see and understand the challenge in front of us as it relates to preservation and the need, I think, would make a big difference. And then I would just go back to like our programs are as effective as our staff is at creating local partners and connecting with them. So this RD modernization case in my head is about staff, is about IT, is about capacity building, and about having the program flexibility to ensure the hardest to serve communities, particularly very rural communities and communities of color, including tribal communities, aren't left behind. And without that modernization, we're less able to build relationships on the ground with partners that we need to make these things happen. So those are a few.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I'd like to ask you a little bit about Farmworker Housing. Before I do, I just want to tell participants that you're welcome to enter questions into the chat. I am trying to monitor it and pose those questions to Justin as they come in. But Justin, Washington is a big, diverse state, and agriculture is a big part of our economy, with apple production, hops, berries, a lot of really great stuff. And but it's also a lot of labor-intensive work that requires a qualified and hardworking workforce.
Right.
And we've learned over the years that adequate, affordable housing is a key part to recruiting and retaining people in this important industry in our state. And RD has one of the few programs that actually is dedicated to try to create additional farm worker housing. Could you talk to us more about that program and what you see in it?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great flag. I appreciate you raising it. I think it's, I mean, it's sort of critical because there are so a few resources aimed at this population. I think it's a program that we get a lot of stakeholder interest in and generally has had strong bipartisan support in a way that not all of our programs have. We have done work to improve the process by which these funds are made available to make them better align with other funding resources like low-income housing tax credits or other local funding. We've tried to do things like make successful applications available publicly. So unsuccessful applicants can see what successful applications look like toward improving their competitive standing. I think for the first time this last year, maybe a couple of years, we've held workshops. So potential applicants could be briefed on the requirements in a way that they could be in conversation with staff to learn more about successful applications. I think for funding available to repair existing farm labor properties, which is new, we'll be publishing a notice of funding availability soon. I can't tell you exactly when. And I think this transparency will allow for existing farm labor housing properties to apply competitively for this sort of funding, which will allow, you know, I think capital repairs that have been hard to come by the resources to support. There will be a farm labor housing technical assistance round of grant resources available in late December. I do have a date for that one, which should help support new farm labor housing construction. So those are some of the, I mean, we are committed to figuring out how we make as much of this support available and we make it as easy to access as possible. It's a piece of our support, like I think I said at the top, that we get a lot of interest in, and I'm hopeful that we can do a better job of ensuring a broader set of applicants are successful.
Yeah, great. That's very helpful. And you spoke to a couple of questions that we've had in the past, so I appreciate the notes on rehabilitation of existing housing and also technical assistance. We had a couple of questions come in the chat. Are there, one of them is related to technical assistance. I think it's slightly broader. Jeff asked about technical assistance available in terms of housing needs assessments and housing studies. Are you aware of any resource like that within the agency?
I'm not, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So let me do a little digging. Needs assessment and what was the other piece?
And housing studies.
I don't, nothing jumps out at me, but that doesn't mean, again, excuse me, That doesn't mean, again, that there aren't resources available, but I can't put my finger on any at the moment. So I'll check on that and send you an answer.
Okay, great. And we can help distribute that.
Great, thank you.
Corby asks if you envision the farm labor housing repair funds to potentially work similarly to the MPR program for preservation, or do you have any more details on
Yeah,
this?
I don't, I'm sorry to say. Again, I appreciate the question, and why don't you let me see if I can get some additional information to share.
Sure. And one more that came in, I'm glad we're getting some good activity. Michael asks if when inspections of RD properties may resume. And yeah.
Yeah, it's a great question. I've had a lot of conversations about this topic. You know, as soon as we safely can, and there's a lot of discussion about that at the department level, and they're paying attention to the data and the science. We've set resources aside for FY22 to do more of that, on the hopes that we'll be able to. Obviously, we're under a continuing resolution at the moment, so our funding is constrained, but the COVID rates at the moment, we're unlikely to see that change in the next 8 weeks. But our hopes is, as infection rates go down, rates of people in the field with their hands in the work can go up.
Yeah, great. We have just a couple of minutes left. We might be able to take one or two more questions. One question I'd like to pose to you, Justin, as we begin to wrap up here is, Secretary Vilsack leads the Department of Agriculture, as you well know. I wonder if you could talk to us about his where housing lines up for him, and also just what your impressions are of working with Secretary Vilsack.
Yeah, it's a great question. I have heard him wax eloquent and really specific about the importance of housing to rural America. He understands the economics of it, the particular challenges right now that rural communities experience in terms of affordability and access. So I think he also sees the economic opportunity in new construction, and that federal resources need to be made available to support and accelerate that construction. So he's had this job before. So he really started hitting the ground at a dead sprint. And I think he understands that this is probably the last time he's going to have the opportunity to be in such a role. So he's really ambitious and played a real leadership role in the creation of reconciliation. And that's why you see $28 billion for RD in reconciliation. He is the most effective executive I've ever worked for. He is thoughtful, he is empathetic, he is exacting, he is really ambitious. It's really a unique combination. He's willing to admit when he's wrong or when he doesn't understand something. I've never had him come into a meeting where he has not read the advanced materials. And when I first came here, I thought we would start with a briefing where we would sort of summarize the key points of whatever the issue is, and he would respond to it. But we've never done that. He's always comes in prepared with a set of questions about the things he wants to better understand. So I've been really pleased to work with him, and it's a real opportunity. So I'm glad to be here. I am committed to doing everything we can at RD to support rural housing. And reconciliation isn't our only future, it's an important one. And I'm hopeful in the near term there'll be significant resources that we can deploy in partnership with Washington State and across the country. So I've really enjoyed the conversation, appreciate the invitation, hope to keep at it, and we'll get answers to those couple of questions I could not answer, and appreciate your all's time.
Well, thank you very much, Justin. We're really glad you're in the position that you're in, and we're also very appreciative of the time you've carved out for us today. Before we end, I just want to also thank the Housing Washington Conference, the Washington State Housing Finance Commission, the Low Income Housing Alliance, and the sponsors for having a keynote address about rural topics and rural housing, and inviting Mr. Maxson to join us. So thank you all, and I wish you the best in the rest of your tenure, and I hope our paths will cross again. And thanks to all of you who participated, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you all.